I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guests today are Jared and Elizabeth Beck. They were the attorneys in the DNC fraud lawsuit. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having us, Sabrina.
We're not dead.
Contrary to rumor, we're not dead. We're still very much alive.
Yeah, for some of you watching, you may remember Jared and Elizabeth after the Bernie 2016 campaign. I wanted to bring you on because, number one, I didn't have a show during that time. But number two, we now have two primary challengers for Joe Biden, Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. And I just really want to remind people of what happened before and what the DNC is really all about. So I want to start from the very beginning and go through kind of a timeline of sorts. After 2016, when Bernie Sanders, lost or whatever, where do we begin in reference to the DNC fraud lawsuit? As I understand, I think Nico House may have came to you at some point with some information about the Bernie campaign.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to tell a story, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, it starts with Elizabeth, my wife, who's seated right next to me, and I, who are just, basically lawyers in Miami, Florida. We've had our own practice down here since 2007. Elizabeth became very fired up by the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016.
The reason is I saw the real estate crash in 2007, and I was wondering what can be done to prevent such a catastrophe. And I thought, well, I just haven't been paying attention to politics, so let me pay attention to politics. Because until then, I had been very apolitical as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I had my political activism years in college. I actually went down to Arkansas in the 1990s and did some third-party work on ballot initiatives around campaign finance reform, which were actually very successful until the courts completely nullified them and threw them out. And then led us into Citizens United. So I wasn't too big on any kind of political activism by the time Bernie Sanders rolled around, but I wasn't going to rain on Elizabeth's parade.
Yeah, he was already.
You know what I'm saying?
But I was like, oh, I think I'm gonna really dig into the candidates and I'm gonna vote.
Right, and
so I did that, and then I went whole hog, and I was doing the dial-a-thons.
What they call them, the Bernie-thons. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, in 2016,
so we were raising money and we were giving our own money, and we were getting quite involved in the process. And then, we saw the rigging happen right before our eyes. But, then significantly from a legal perspective, Guccifer 2.0 dropped the first wave of documents before WikiLeaks did that sort of gave a flavor of the DNC's rigging of the process for Hillary Clinton. And then, what really sort of spurred the lawsuit was Nico House came into our office, sometime in the summer of 2016.
He was fresh out of college then.
Right. I mean, he was fresh out of college. He was the head of Carolina students for Bernie, and he had been on the grassroots. And, it's one thing to sort of, get a bunch of documents and see sort of the memos and the internal correspondence that sort of says, we're going to make Hillary Clinton the nominee, and that's the whole goal of the primary process, not to run a fair and even primary according to our own documents. I mean, it's one thing to see those documents. Then if someone comes into your office and they have sort of on the ground information and they can point you,
it's at that point, it's systemic. It's not just you. It's not just in your head.
Right. But it's more than that. You also need like people who are going to tell the story and have credibility. And, one thing about Nico is, he's, not only very intellectually astute, but
he doesn't eat mushrooms.
He doesn't eat mushrooms, and he's a no BS kind of guy. And he cuts right to the chase. Either. I mean, he was making videos out of his car, driving from Carolina to down to Miami, and so we kind of prepared.
Remember that time when Nico was in our backyard?
Well, but I don't want to get side railed here because I'm trying to tell the story. No, seriously, let's stay focused here because I want to get the whole story out. So he came to our office, and we actually gave him a desk and a computer, and we're like, basically, it's sort of our perspective was the documents that had been dropped by Guccifer 2.0 and how we could, what they meant and how we could plead a legal theory on behalf of the hundreds and then thousands of people that were calling our office and emailing us saying, this is such BS, this rigging, is there anything, that we can do? And by the way, this is even before the convention started. Okay, I want to make that very clear. I think it's important that people understand that we actually got the lawsuit off the ground, before, Philadelphia happened and the convention was formally given to Hillary Clinton. We had already had that lawsuit on file, and our aim was not to like reverse the results or, all these Trump lawsuits try to do, but we were trying to get the money back for the people that had contacted us because we saw this as a huge monetary fraud to the tune of $220 million that went to the Bernie Sanders campaign and then into the Democratic Party ecosystem. That was just, we had homeless people who were our clients, okay, that were reaching into their pockets. That's how awful this thing was, okay? And in retrospect, it was a very traumatic experience, I think, for a lot of people. It certainly, changed our lives. But I hope some lessons were learned from it, and I hope
don't donate.
Right. But I hope that the record that we created is of some use to people going forward, especially in these times, as you have candidates like Robert Kennedy and Marianne Wilson coming around with their hand out, wanting you to reach into your pocket as, inflation is on the rise and the economy is going into the shitter. They want you to send your money to their enterprises. And, my advice as, a fellow citizen and as a lawyer and as somebody who has litigated this issue extensively is, you can do what you want with your money, but just be aware that this process is 100% fake. So don't get angry, and certainly don't call our office asking to file a lawsuit because we're not doing anything close to that ever again. Okay. But
actually our law firm is pretty much closed.
Yeah. We're closed for business now for the most part, but, don't do that, but definitely don't complain. Okay, you don't deserve to. You are on notice. You have notice now. Okay, that this process is a scam. It's as genuine to elections as professional wrestling is to wrestling. That's the best analogy. If you're still going to professional wrestling and you're shelling out your money because you think you're seeing authentic athletics, then you're a fool. If you're doing it because you enjoy the thrill, that's fine, but you can still watch the election nonsense and not give your money away. So it seems to me like you're flushing the money down the toilet.
You
so
know,
it's just,
if we're supposed to give advice, I would say whatever money you want to donate, use it to work down whatever debt you have.
If you have
that's
debt,
what I would say.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gonna. In other words, I think people need to get out of the mind.
These fuckers don't care about you.
Right, but the people need to get out of the mindset of, oh, in order to make a difference and be a politically active, conscious person,
in order to be a good citizen, okay, you have to go and vote and volunteer and save dogs. And volunteering and saving dogs is fine and dandy, but it's all shit. Let me tell you about jury trial. Jared recently.
Well, no. I don't want to get into the. I mean, I think the message is should stay on voting for now, because it's a very specific message.
It's rigged. They've admitted that it's rigged. If you want to watch a puppet show, go ahead. But it's not. But it's.
Yeah, I want to show this to people who may not be aware, because this is the piece that people really need to take home. And I have a question for you about this as well. Now, this came from DNC attorney Bruce Spiva. He said there's no such thing as a Democrat. The DNC just encourages people to vote for the Democratic Party. No one has any right to an expectation of a fair election. If the DNC wishes to select a candidate in the primaries instead of a free election process, that is their right. Donating money to Bernie Sanders doesn't mean you thought that money was going to assist him to win the primary. You have no right to think the DNC was obligated to follow their own charter and internal policies about elections. And then this last piece here, discussion of and any disputes with the DNC do not belong in a transparent process in a court of law. The DNC is a private association which should never be asked to engage in the discovery process or have to reveal any of its internal workings or strategies should they decide to select a candidate rather than allow a fair election of a candidate. And the question that I have about this statement that the DNC is basically a private corporation, so to speak. How far does this go back? Does this go back all the way back to, since we mentioned RFK Jr., to when JFK ran for president, or when the original Bobby Kennedy ran for president? Does it go back that far, do you think?
So I wrote a book about the lawsuit, and I attempted to sort of trace that question back through time. And in terms of the rigging that you see now, where, the DNC operates as a private entity, with no duty to the people, it purports to call its members, but then its lawyer gets up in court and says it has no members. But that you see that go back to the 60s. You see that style of rigging going back to McGovern, the McGovern campaign in the 70s. It's institutional. It's not, 100% the same every primary system, because they're constantly tweaking the rules and the role of superdelegates and things like that. But I'd say by the time it gets to 2016, they have the process pretty airtight. And the real difference between our times and sort of back then is the role of the media. Okay, the media is like 100% propaganda apparatus for, the duopoly party system, and has no journalistic interest whatsoever. I mean, it's really devolved to that. I think it was a little bit different. I think it was more of an infiltration by intelligence agencies in the 60s and 70s, and less of like a wholesale capture and propaganda operation. Now it's a very aggressive propaganda operation that the media runs against its own population on behalf of the hand-selected puppets that it puts up there as candidates. So if you look at the array in 2000, we're going to have for 2024. You've got Robert Kennedy. I mean, his daughter-in-law is a well-known CIA analyst.
Yep.
Married to a billionaire. So, Bernie Sanders had some red flags in retrospect. I mean, RFK's got like blazing, flags of, burning on fire, basically. I mean, if you're going and Marianne Wilson is obviously some asset that they throw out there every so often to, to soothe some people's psychologies. I don't really know exactly what her purpose is, but she's one of these creepy intelligence assets that you see bandied around from time to time. So I wouldn't pay any attention. I mean, look, like I said, you can watch professional wrestling for entertainment. You can watch American elections for entertainment, but to make the leap that these are in any way determining the nature of our government and that you and I have a role in the process is to just fool yourself completely. So if you're going to, spend your money based on a foolish idea, at least realize you're doing it while you're doing it.
I realize that the political process, I have no stake or say in it. So I don't pay attention to it anymore because as pure entertainment, I find it very boring. I know some people may disagree. They love the characters, but I don't. So once I realized that it wasn't what it was pitched to me when I went to school, I completely lost all interest. There's nothing I can do about it, though. The thing is, the concern is the idea that that America is a democracy, and that we have the citizenry has a say in how it's governed is so embedded in our psyche that there is actually a mental block against people. They don't want to know it, it's just too awful. It's too awful because I was doing a lot of thinking, but if you take away the way America is governed, if you take that away, there's really nothing that binds us as a country. Because I was talking to someone and he was from Spain, and I said, what binds people from Spain? And he was kind of joking. He says, well, we take naps.
Yeah.
He was joking. But here's the thing. I was born in Korea. Koreans don't take naps. It's a cultural thing that binds them. And food is something that binds a lot of cultures. I say that as a Korean because Koreans eat kimchi. And the Chinese make fun of Koreans. They call them the kimchi eaters because China doesn't eat kimchi. So food, but what does America have? What does all the people in this 50 states, from the people who go into some convention center in a big city and they take their oath and they become citizens to some daughter of the American Revolution. What does all these people, what do they have in common? If you take away their role of governance, because also it was pitched to the world as something that made this country very special.
Yeah, I mean, that's my concern. I don't really cry the tears so much for the American people because, I mean, look, yeah, I mean, I agree with Elizabeth. This has always been pitched as a melting pot with, a great constitution and a system of government that's democratic. And, but how many people have we incinerated around the world in the name of those ideals that are so patently false? I mean, that to me is a point of shame.
So it's not even true.
I think the rest of the world is waking up.
I think they're on to us.
I think they're on to us.
Yeah, I will say the other thing too. Another reason why I asked that question is because if we go back to Bobby Kennedy was killed after he won the California presidential primary.
Correct.
And I think more people need to look at that.
Absolutely.
Like in the sense of like they were trying to stop and they're like, there is no way we're going to let this guy get into the White House.
Because he was gonna come after the CIA, which killed his brother.
The other thing is people don't want to admit that assassinations, I think, happen very routinely in this country.
Right.
It just seems so undemocratic, right?
Right.
You're supposed to lose fair and square at the polls. You're not supposed to take out your opponent.
But Sabrina, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that's the seminal moment, I think. The assassination of JFK, and then the assassination of RFK, and alongside the assassination of MLK. But those that
don't forget Malcolm X.
And don't forget Malcolm X. It's really a quadruple assassination that takes out, 4 very powerful political leaders who may very well have advanced through the political process and taken off the road from becoming like what we are today, which is a totalitarian security state run by a corporate oligarchy.
Now there was a gentleman, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a gentleman that did speak out about the rigging with Bernie Sanders, and he was found dead or something like that? Sean?
Oh, he was our process server.
No, he was just.
He was our process. We hired him to serve process on Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic Party.
The process server is the guy that shows up with the lawsuit and says, "You're served."
He's the guy that shows up with the lawsuit and kicks it off. So you hire a process server. We hired him. Now, here's the very strange thing about this. So he serves. We actually thought something strange was going to happen with service of process, so we had it videotaped.
That's not why we videotaped it.
Well, no, we videoed it because it was part of the advocacy process, and we wanted to create a record of the DNC being served in the DNC's offices because they're shady as fuck.
I hired the videographer, and I did it because a lot of people were
interested in the lawsuit. That's why you did it, and that's why I approved it. Okay? Was because I thought it'd be a good idea to create a video record. It's on YouTube to this day. It has 600,000 views.
I made that video.
And it shows Sean Lucas and our videographer Ricardo going into the DNC headquarters in DC and serving the papers on this woman named Rebecca Harries, who comes down from the DNC's office via elevator and accepts the papers. And then the DNC showed up in court. And what is the first motion they file? That's to dismiss the case based on insufficient service of process.
In other words, you're talking a lot of legalese.
I know I'm talking a lot of legalese, and I'm sure if I have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me and ask. I mean, but I'm trying to give sort of the legal rundown. Why else would Sabrina want to have the lawyers on if we're not going to talk some legalese? Right?
Yeah. People
I'm trying to defend myself. Anyway, so in other words, they filed a motion in court saying we should dismiss your case without even looking at it because you didn't properly serve us at the DNC headquarters, even though we had it on video. Okay, so the Judge Williams Locke, lifelong Republican appointed by Reagan, he knew something funny was happening. He scheduled a hearing. Okay, at that hearing, we were going to resolve the issue of whether the DNC was correctly served with process. And weeks before the hearing, 2 weeks, what happens? We learn on Facebook that Sean Lucas, our process server, had dropped dead in his bathroom. Young man of 28 years old. No prior history of health problems. So, I don't know. If you're sitting in our shoes as the lawyers on a case and a witness in an upcoming hearing drops dead, some may take that as a, very strong mafia-like message being directed to you.
I find
that you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong.
I find this conversation very difficult because, you really can't talk about this without immediately people saying things like, oh, it's just a coincidence or this and that. And I'm just like, you're not going to get assigned. It's all done through signals and.
Right. But it goes further than that because did they ever hand over the autopsy report in reference to Sean?
We actually followed up on the issue with the DC police and we got them to release. I don't know if it's an official autopsy report.
No, only Kin can get that.
Okay, only Kin can, but we did get an emailed summary of what was in it. And, according to this report, he had 3 different drugs in his body at the time he was found on his bathroom floor by his girlfriend, including fentanyl and kratom and I'm not here to speculate on
I don't want to cast aspersions on the DC police, but I have just read several stories over the years of autopsy officials being real funny.
Meanwhile, the Seth Rich is going on at the same time. And here's the crazy thing about it, Sabrina, is that Seth Rich would have also been a witness in our case because he was the guy in charge of voter data at the DNC, one of the main guys. And that, of course, if we're trying to prove in court, okay, that the DNC is involved in rigging the primaries, we already have a prima facie case based on the WikiLeaks documents and the Gucci for Two documents. But we're also going to, in the discovery process, go after the people who are in charge of the data and recording the votes and, recording the voting data. And we're going to subpoena that information, and he's going to be on our witness list. And boom, he's around. I can't remember if it was before or after Sean Lucas, but he's found dead on the streets of D.C. with a bullet in his back.
He was shot on the streets of D.C. Right. It's still unsolved, and all his wallet and his watch and his phone were all on.
I don't think we should say any more about that because you'll get sued for defamation by his family for no, that happened. No.
I'm not trying.
That's why we're like sort of out of the game now because it's too dangerous out there from many perspectives. Okay, I mean it's not worth in this inserting yourself in this country's murderous politics because your life will get derailed and ruined. Look at the J6. Okay, they all show up to what is that? It's like a rowdy election protest. Okay, how many of them are going to be spending, years in jail now? Okay.
Who's the J6?
The January 6 people.
Oh.
Okay,
this is the problem. Oh, the other thing about is you okay. So, there's a Supreme Court justice who apparently has been taking private trips and getting money and this and that. Clarence Thomas. And the thing is, the only people that are squawking about it are the Democratic senators. Right. That's the problem. I have come to realize that actually, I don't think people are all that upset about how things are run. They're just upset that it's not being run to their benefit. That's when I wash my hands of the whole thing. Because I came to the conclusion that people can't, maybe it doesn't really bother them that's happening. It's just that they're not part of the game. So, so that's why I really don't want to do anything. I don't want to stick out my neck out really anymore.
Yeah. One of the things I've been wondering about as well, do you feel like Bernie's 2016 campaign was infiltrated in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, they're all infiltrated.
Yeah, I mean, he's rotten to the core. It's infiltrated by Bernie Sanders himself. That guy had no intention of doing anything
Groucho Marx said, I don't want to join any club that'll have me as a member. Any candidate, any political candidate that actually holds office for any length of time, they're all shit. I know that sounds very trite. Now I understand what people who said that meant. Okay, because there's a gentleman. What was his name? Wellstone.
Oh, you mean the Senator Wellstone?
Senator Wellstone. Nobody talks about him. He was a progressive senator from Minnesota.
Died assassinated.
And you know what? He just died in a freaking plane crash.
Right.
I've never heard of this guy.
That's what I'm saying. Nobody talks about him. He does have a Wikipedia page.
I think it had to do with his opposition to the Iraq War.
Right. The thing
he wasn't gonna.
But he had a lot of
stand down.
It's like the Kennedys light. It doesn't matter. It could be at the highest levels. It could be at local. But if you have a lot of support and you are actually a threat, but you don't play ball, if they can't squash you, they will take you out. So, Senator Sanders has been in politics for how long? Mm-hmm. They have no core. It's whatever hand is moving them.
He was a complete liar.
I don't pay attention to politics anymore because I realized that whether they're shit or not, my candidate it's utterly meaningless. It's utterly meaningless.
Why do you think RFK Jr., because I've had this conversation with Marianne. I haven't spoken to RFK Jr. yet. Why do you think RFK Jr., knowing what he knows about the CIA and his uncle and his father, why do you think he's so, I I guess, so steadfast on running through the Democratic Party, knowing how corrupt the system is. And I say knowing because there was a recent interview with him and Russell Brand where he told Russell Brand that he knows that the superdelegates are going to give it to Joe Biden. So if you know that, and I'll talk more about that on Tuesday, but if you know that, then why would you go through the system?
Well, here's my, hold on a second. Here's my, I'm going to get a lot of hate from the people that watch you and maybe have fallen in love with RFK Jr. and his candidacy, but I don't care. I'm just going to tell you my views on that. I mean, the Kennedys are a very, very compromised bunch. Okay, like this is a dude. The CIA took out his uncle. It took out his father. Has he gotten justice for them? Okay, I mean, I give MLK's family a lot of credit because they filed a lawsuit and got a jury to find that the deep state took out their father.
Nobody talks about that either.
Right. No one talks about that, but they at least did what they could to get a judicial finding on the record. So it's part of the historical record. For what it's worth, we at least have that. RFK Jr., yeah, he's called for an investigation, but he's never done that. Instead, what has he done? He's enjoyed the fruits of an extraordinarily lucrative plaintiff's career. He is a sickeningly rich man, okay, from the lawsuits. And I can tell you as a plaintiff's lawyer, you don't get the kind of rewards that he gets without the serious blood connections, okay, because they're not handed to you. Okay, they certainly were never handed to us, and we worked our asses off.
We closed our law firm.
Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, he has sucked the blood out of a system that's been very favorable to him and his family. And let's not forget Teddy Boy. Okay, you know that dude. Okay, enjoyed an extremely corrupt and worthless career in the Senate, carrying water for the Democrats and the deep state and the intelligence communities after they took out his own brothers. I find that disgusting. Okay,
and he killed the woman.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, let's not forget Chappaquiddick. Okay. But he's a disgusting, even aside from that, even if it was a horrible accident and, we can absolve him. I mean, the fact is these people didn't even get justice for their own, how is he going to get justice for us like nobodies if he couldn't get justice for JFK and RFK? Okay. He's a complete compromised person. He was talked into this apparently by Steve Bannon, who gave us the other great carnival barker, Donald Trump. And that's all it is. It's just to appease. He's doing it to appease very disaffected Americans right now who understand what happened with vaccines, who are really pissed about it. And I know they're pissed about it. I was at a very large jury selection recently in Miami-Dade, and the question was asked about what your opinion is about Fauci, okay? And half the hands in the room shot up, and they did not have nice things to say about this man. I've never seen anything like it at a jury veneer, okay? But people are pissed, okay? People's families have been dying, okay? All right, so he's there. He's the new Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders can't sheepdog those people. He never took a stance against vaccines. He told everyone to get the jab and support our stupid war in the Ukraine, right? I mean, he's useless. He's useless as a sheepdog now. Bobby's going to get a lot of money, and I know he likes money. I mean,
there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
I was.
So I don't have a lot of nice things to say about him.
I was looking at elevated deaths. Elevated deaths is an insurance term.
Right.
And elevated deaths is year over year in a particular year. The actuaries, they look at years of data and they kind of know how many people are going to die in a given year, right? So if you have something beyond that, it's called higher than that's called an elevated death year. And usually there's a reason for it. And ever since COVID happened, the elevated deaths have been climbing. Now, what's interesting is that they say that COVID is over and people are getting the vaccine and boosters, but the elevated deaths are still happening. Okay. So there's something weird going on. I don't even know why I'm talking about this.
But that's why because the question was about what RFK, and that's his he's purportedly, the anti-vaxxer, and he's gonna, but didn't he already say, like, let's forgive Fauci?
Well,
Yeah,
that's the
so
thing.
I covered his announcement here in Boston.
Right.
Most people there that I talked to didn't care anything about like his opinion about like jabs or anything like that. Like
Really?
they were more focused on the anti-war message. That's what brought a lot of them out. Like
Okay.
he had a lot. I did not
Interesting.
expect to see that many people there. I thought there'll probably be
But
like 50,
you're in
maybe.
Boston though. Let's
Yeah, but there were people
Yeah.
from all over. I met a woman
Okay.
there who was from Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
So there were people that came from different places, but I expected to see maybe 50 to 80 people there. There
Hope.
were hundreds there, and they had to have 3 overflow rooms because those people couldn't get into the main room.
Where was it?
So this was at the Boston Park Plaza.
Oh,
hotel.
okay. The hotel near the like Park Street. Like
Yeah, but my concern is that, I like his anti-war message as well. I like some of the issues that he has on his platform, but I have serious concerns about anybody knowing what happened to Bernie Sanders, trying to do this through the Democratic Party,
right.
Especially during a primary, like they're primarying a sitting Democrat president.
Right.
So my thing is if I interview you, because Marianne, I did interview her, if I interview you and you tell me that that they're going to try to do these things and it's corrupt and you see the media is already smearing you or they're
Right.
not even mentioning that you're running, right? Why are you doing this to the Democratic Party? Why aren't you choosing to run as an independent or third party candidate? Not saying that you will win, but to make a message. And if you are running through the Democratic Party and you said you're doing this just to make a message, if I get the feeling that that's what RFK Jr. is doing, if you're doing this just to make a message, get a point across, then why not do that as an independent or third party candidate instead of taking money from people? Because you guys know Bernie Sanders got a lot of money from working class people.
$220 million in 2016. Okay. I mean, that was what we were trying to get back for people. I still want my money back. I mean, it was a complete fraud. I mean, people really, truly believed that. And here's the sad thing, Sabrina. In Citizens United, the Supreme Court came down with that horrible decision and they said, money is the basis of our politics, right? Money is speech. We're going to protect the corporation's right to give as much money as it wants to any candidate. Okay. This is what people were trying to do with Bernie Sanders. They were trying to take the Supreme Court's message to heart and say, okay, you're telling us money is the essence of our politics, right? So we're going to give our money to Bernie Sanders. And so it's like being duped on all levels, Nobody has the back of the people that were in the Bernie Sanders movement. I mean, we tried our best on behalf of them. Because
we don't have real elections. It's all a show. And
as far as, RFK Jr. and what his motivations are, I mean, I really think that he's a team player for the intelligence community. And I think they need a sheepdog that's going to, like you said, people were, like his message on the war, right? Well, Bernie Sanders can't sheepdog that because he's been, sending gazillions of dollars to the Nazis in the Ukraine. So
I think they're running out of people.
Right. They're running out of people.
I think that's why they're scraping. They're like starting to reach into the Kennedy plan.
He's got some sweet deal going there. And plus,
America still likes you.
He wants a platform.
We need you. Get out.
But he's going to be a good player for his friend Joe Biden. And I think it's sad. And I think he needs to be called out. Here's the thing. I don't think this does anyone any good. I don't care what kind of message he's trying to get out there. The only way this system is going to get any better is if it breaks first. And the only way it breaks is if people stop participating in it. Okay.
It's going to break regardless.
It's going to break regardless.
Because it's on the horizon.
Right. But it's going to galump along in a painful fashion as long as you have people like RFK Jr. who are willing to breathe oxygen into it.
It's like printing money. You got to print it to keep it going.
Right.
But
I'm saying people like him are culpable.
How do you feel about this recent statement that came from Simone Sanders? She was on, I think it was MSNBC, and she said that the Democratic Party is not going to allow primary debates.
I think she's correct, and I think she's being honest, like Bruce Spiva was being honest in our case. And I give Bruce Spiva a lot of credit as the attorney for the DNC, because I don't think he minced words. I think he laid out the legal position. And the one thing I can say about our case, we weren't able to get a positive judgment for our clients, but we got something maybe more important, which was an on-the-record statement from their counsel in open court describing exactly what the DNC is and how it conducts its business.
Yeah, but it's, it's hard. People are like, no, it's not true.
Right, yeah. but you got to look. The generations that are going to clean up this mess, they're going to need some type of historical record, and that's why I think it's so important. When you look at MLK's family,
what makes you think it's going to get cleaned up?
No, but a legal record is a legal record. It's hard to fabricate a legal record. That's why when MLK sued to prove that his family, that MLK was killed by the government, created a record. But RFK hasn't done that. Why?
This is interesting because the problem is most Americans, I don't think, especially most people I've spoken to, most Americans have no idea. Like, they really do think that when they go to the voting booth, that they are, somewhat in a shape or form making a difference. And when I explain to people about the DNC fraud lawsuit, most people have never heard of it. Right. Some may have heard of it, but they didn't know all the details and the ins and outs. And then when they hear the facts, they're like, oh my God, you mean to tell me it's all just a sham? Well, then what do we do?
Right. So the reason nobody's heard about it, one of the reasons is we've been banned from Twitter since 2019. Okay. Even after the Elon Musk amnesty, which to me shows that, this knowledge is extremely dangerous to the system, because this is what keeps the system going, is this belief that you pointed to, which is that, our votes count, right? So they, while we were pursuing our appeal in the 11th Circuit.
It's like the belief in the power of the dollar.
Right.
Fiat money.
Right.
It's just driven by collective belief.
But in terms of the DNC fraud lawsuit, this, to me, the knowledge that lawsuit supplies is dangerous to the continuation of the system, because once people stop putting their money into it and stop pressing the button at the polls, then the system fails to do its job, which is to keep people compliant.
You know what's really scary? When you have your money at the bank, supposedly there's this entity called the FDIC that insures it up to $250,000. Here's the funny thing. If everybody in the country withdrew their cash from the banks and there was a run on all the banks, the FDIC can't cover all that. That $250,000 insurance is illusory.
That's interesting. Well,
they'll have it.
I tell people, when I look at how much money a lot of these candidates have raised during their campaigns, like Unapologetic, he wrote an article that said Bernie Sanders had raised over $100 million in his 2020 campaign. And I look at that money and I think that's money we could have put towards mutual aid. We could have built clinics for people in this country. We could have built more housing for people in this country, but instead it went to a candidate that didn't win anyway. And then on top of that, he obviously gave his email list to the Democratic Party, because I have people who I never supported emailing me and I'm like, how'd you get my email address? I've never supported any of you guys.
Right. I get texted all the time by these people, and it's all because, we gave money to Bernie Sanders. And, even beyond the collective amount, I'm just appalled at the fact that he took money from homeless people and people that are doing, that was his base, was the people at the very bottom. Okay. And he took an enormous amount of money out of their pockets. He promised a contested convention and then he just rolled over. Okay. And and sheepdogged everybody to the candidate who stands for everything that he was supposedly against. I mean, it doesn't get any more craven and cowardly than that. And that's exactly what RFK Jr. is going to do. Okay. I think that he's motivated by the same things as Bernie Sanders, which is that he's ultimately a politician who wants influence, and he wants to direct money to his friends, and he wants to direct money from that's going to go into his campaign, into the Democratic ecosystem. I mean, so, look, people are free to do what they want. They're free to do it, their money, what they want, but don't be disappointed when it doesn't work out the way that you hope it works out, because there is now hard evidence of the true nature of our political system out there. We've got transcripts from our case, which lay things out in black and white. And, if you want to ignore that evidence, it's on you.
Yeah, I also want to say too, have either of you heard Bernie Sanders even discuss the DNC fraud lawsuit? Because I haven't.
Never. In fact, Debbie, the same progressive, supposedly, I never saw this, but I understand that she confronted him, back in the day, directly, in person about the DNC fraud lawsuit, and he just totally blew her off. So, I mean, I don't appreciate it. I mean, we put a lot of money into his campaign. It's really just lousy to sell out your supporters like that. And, but that's just, there is no political system which allows people to actually represent a constituency other than the corporations that pay them money. That's true on both sides of the aisle. It's the Republicans and the Democrats. And that's another thing, by the way, is that, you would think that the MAGA people would be, supportive of us, and
the MAGA people only came out of the woodwork,
right?
Because they generally like to see infighting of the other party,
right? I mean, they don't.
It was more.
That was the other disappointing thing, is that this could have been sort of a unitary moment for the MAGA people and the disaffected Bernie voters to sort of come together on the issue of election rigging, given what happened to Trump. Yep. But, the MAGA people, they are under the illusion that we have a fair system too. Okay. They think they actually believed, when Trump lost to Biden, they were all, under the belief that these ridiculous lawsuits filed by that, L. Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell were actually going to, win the election for them. And anybody who had been following our case would know that that's just never going to happen in a million years. Okay. The courts are just not in a position to, overturn an election. I mean, we learned that from Bush v. Gore, right? I mean, isn't that the precedent from Bush v. Gore? Supreme Court's not going to overturn an election no matter what the heck is going on. Okay. They made that clear in 2000. So, and then, with our case, it was very clear that the court, even though our judge was very sympathetic to our cause, the court just isn't in a position to do anything about it. Okay. Because who governs our country, right? It's not our elected representatives. I realize
those judges are not going to stick their necks out either.
No, of course not.
Right.
Hell no.
What was did Bernie Sanders, after the DNC fraud lawsuit, after the result, did Bernie Sanders issue any type of statement to either of you or anyone?
Never.
Very interesting.
Never contacted us. Never even said, hey, thanks for, sticking all your money, into my campaign and then paying your own money to finance this lawsuit. And that's another thing, there are all these lawyers that go out there raising money for these worthless lawsuits. I mean, you saw the MAGA lawyers do that, L. Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, people were giving them all kinds of money. We never took a dime from anyone for our case. We paid out of our own pocket for the costs, and we didn't even get a thank you note from this guy. So, you know, he's.
Why are we talking about him? I haven't
Because
thought
he's a
about
jackass.
I haven't thought about him in years.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, this is all really interesting. I really just wanted people to hear this because I'm hearing it now. I'm hearing people saying, "Oh, Marianne's going to get there. She's going to be able to do what Bernie couldn't do. RFK Jr. is going to be able to do what Bernie couldn't do." And I feel like they're completely ignoring the problems with the system, and particularly this fraud lawsuit, which I think more people need to know about. You wrote a book, Jared, correct, called "What Happened to Bernie Sanders?"
Yeah, I got it here, right here.
Everyone should read this book.
You can
It's
get
very important.
Cheap copies are on Amazon, like $2. You can get like a used copy. But this has the most important thing here is the transcripts. We put the transcripts of the case in here so you can see for yourself. And it's very interesting. During the hearing, the judge was really questioning the DNC lawyer. It wasn't us doing the questioning. It was the judge. He had a whole list of questions, and he wanted to get it on the record. And he said something very interesting at the end of the hearing. He said, democracy demands the truth because people need to make intelligent decisions.
Hey, Judge, we don't live in a democracy.
Well, you know,
That's
maybe
right.
we don't, but he created a record, and that record hopefully will save some people some money this time around. I mean, if it does nothing else, I hope it saves people some money because they're going to need, you got to be in survival mode these days, you know, preserve your assets. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we got bad economic times ahead. Don't give money away. I mean, if you have like money to burn, then go for it. But if you're, you know, times are tough, okay, don't put your money into this. Put it into something else that's gonna, you know, help your survival and the survival of your loved ones. That's my advice. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. Well said. Well, thank you. Thank both of you so much for coming on. One more question for you. Recently, I was asking Norm Finkelstein this question. Is there any value in having a candidate, a progressive candidate, so to speak, run through the Democratic Party to primary challenge Joe Biden? Norm Finkelstein said, yes, there's still value because as a socialist perspective, that is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to try to challenge people with the left ideas. Of course, I did tell him about the DNC fraud lawsuit, and I told him about the fact that there's no way that the DNC is going to allow those candidates to win. And he said, well, yeah, that's the other piece. But I want to hear from you. Do you think there's any value in doing that?
Personally, I don't think there's any value. I think you have the first thing I would encourage people to, instead of trying to be politically active, to be politically literate. And politically literate means, first and foremost, truly understanding the nature of the system. And the nature of the system is an oligarchy. And it's an oligarchy that's extremely totalitarian and authoritarian and very, very much propagandized at this point in time. So that means that the democratic institutions, the purported democratic institutions, are tools of the oligarchy and nothing more. Okay, so if somebody is running and lots of people run for the presidency every year. Okay, there's always like a list of like, you know, hundreds of people. There's all kinds of third parties, right? I mean, only like a select few ever get any attention in the media. Okay, I mean, there's a reason that the only two we hear about are RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson. It's because they are fully controlled. Okay, so I don't see any value in like a fully controlled asset doing their thing in the way that Norm Finkelstein does, because I think if you want to get to a democratic place in this country's trajectory, this system has to break. And for this system to break, the fuel that drives it needs to dry up. And the fuel that drives it is precisely the participation of people in, you know, the professional wrestling.
The petrodollar. It fuels everything in this country.
Right. I mean, that's the economic side. But the political side is that the fuel that drives it is these fake elections. So if you're participating in fake elections, you're fueling the bad system. Okay. So I don't know what kind of socialist Norm Finkelstein is. I'm not an anything myself. But my, take on that is that if you want to get to a democratic place, and I suspect he wants to get to a democratic place, something has to break here, just like the banks are breaking, right? I mean, we're seeing the banks breaking on the economic side. Eventually, that is going to break the petrodollar. Okay, something analogous needs to happen on the political side. I don't exactly know how that's going to play out, but it's not going to be furthered by fake candidates running in a fake election.
Very well said. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. And where can people find you? I know you're not on Twitter, but
don't find us.
Socials? Don't find you.
We have no social media presence. Don't call us to file any lawsuits.
Stay off my yard.
If you want to buy the book, you can get like a $2 copy on Amazon, and I would highly, recommend reading it if you want the full story, because it's got a lot of detail in there that we weren't able to get into today. But we don't necessarily want to be found, so don't find us.
I hear you. Well, thank you two so much.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. It was a pleasure.
Bye
now.
All right. Interesting discussion there, guys. I have a couple more news stories that we want to go to tonight, but definitely share that with people. You need to hear that story. And if you have not read that book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders, you need to read that book. You really need to read that. This needs to be a lesson for everyone. I'm going to go ahead to some of the comments here and then shout out patrons, and we'll get into news. Desert Mansa says DNC fraud lawsuit, cool stuff at Sabby Sabs, more great journalism. Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat, Avery Bella. Sorry, Sabby, but those lawyers are nuts. What? MW as an intelligence asset, please. Interesting. Thank you for the super chat, Kit. Senator Paul Wellstone, Minnesota. It was easy to change the landing system to get the plane off the track when it was landing, so they did. Also, the Republican data whiz that crashed as he returned from D.C. Interesting. I'll have to look up Paul Wellstone. I was not familiar with him. And thank you for this super chat as well, Kit. The election has been decided already. Sorry. Thank you for that. Quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a shout out here to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Zach Boyles. Whoop, whoop. Thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate that. Okay, we have a couple of more stories I do want to cover today, and we are going to do call in today after this segment, because I really do want to talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit. I want to get your perspective on that. So it won't be a particularly long call-in episode because it is Sunday, but we are going to do a little bit of a chat over there after the show. But tonight, we are going to discuss Richard Wolff bank crisis. Speaking of the banks, so they mentioned that earlier. I want to get into that. We're also going to discuss Elon Musk, new CEO. This is huge, and I'm going to tell you why this new CEO is problematic. We're also going to talk about Lula praises Julian Assange, and he pushes back on the Biden administration about how they handled that. That's going to be an interesting story. And of course, the lawyers from the DNC fraud lawsuit, the Becks, were just here. Okie doke. Let's get into the story here with Elon Musk. Now, if you have not seen this, yes, the news is true. Elon Musk has hired a new CEO for Twitter. He is going to assume a different position. Let's go ahead and get into that, and I'll explain to you who she is and why there are problems with her. So Elon Musk tweeted this. He said, "I am excited to welcome Linda Yaccarino as the new CEO of Twitter, Linda will focus primarily on business operations, while I focus on product design and new technology. Looking forward to working with Linda to transform this platform. So he had teased about this a while back. Do you guys want someone else to run Twitter? He did have those polls, etc. I think it just seemed to be a little bit too much for him as CEO. So he's still going to work with Twitter, but in a different role, in a different capacity. But when we look at Linda, hold on to your seat for this one. So this is Linda Yaccarino. I want you to see a little bit about her. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You see, she changed her info here. So let me go to my account because I had a feeling that would happen. There's me. But that's okay, because I know that I shared a screenshot. So it was a retweet. So give me just a second. Oh, they don't have it on there. So we'll just go down. Anywho, Linda is not all who you think she is. I just want to make sure I don't miss it, because this was pretty recent that I tweeted this. And I noticed she made some changes there. Here we go. Okay, so I said you can't make this up. Look at Linda's profile here. Look at this. Maybe it was her LinkedIn one. It was her LinkedIn one. Look, chairman at NBCU, board director, global leader, marketer, COO, philanthropist, public speaker. Doesn't look too bad, right? Look at this. Linda Yaccarino, World Economic Forum. This is the piece people need to pay attention to. Linda is also the chairman of the World Economic Forum. Notice that's not in her Twitter profile. So why would Elon Musk hire someone as CEO of Twitter that is the chairman for the World Economic Forum? You don't see that as a conflict of interest? This is a social media site. Social media site that just released Twitter files where they have exposed that different government agencies were censoring people on Twitter and suspending people on Twitter and basically telling Twitter how to run their own platform. And you don't think it is going to be an issue that you have someone with the World Economic Forum as the CEO of Twitter? Well, let's talk about why there is a problem with the WEF. Now, Common Dreams wrote an article about this a while back, actually in January. 200 millionaires to world leaders at Davos. Tax the ultra rich and do it now. Until Davos attendees start talking about taxing the rich, the entire gathering will remain a very public example of how out of touch they really are. Let's scoot down here because I want to get to the millionaire part. A group of more than 200 millionaires from 13 countries published an open letter Tuesday calling on world leaders gathered in Davos to tackle skyrocketing inequality by taxing rich people like themselves, warning that extreme concentrations of wealth at the top are unsustainable. So that came from people who are already wealthy. It goes on to say, the letter comes on the heels of two analyses detailing how the global rich have captured a disproportionate share of the wealth generated in recent years with the help of policies that often allow them to pay a lower tax rate than ordinary workers who are bearing the brunt of price increases, falling real wages, and economic instability. Let's go down here. With the exception of a few high-profile moments, such as historian Rutger Bregman's viral 2019 rant on the prevalence of tax dodging and world leaders' refusal to address it, The topic of taxation has largely been sidelined at Davos. Now, Davos, I covered this a couple months back. This was the event for the World Economic Forum. That's where they met. Let's go on. An annual gathering of corporate and political elites that often produces splashy rhetoric, but no concrete action. There is a handful of people who attend this event, rich people. And I don't mean someone who's a millionaire. I mean very wealthy, elite people. And they get together for this conference at Davos, and they make decisions about what they think would be best for the rest of us, the rest of the world. And there are no working class people. There are no middle class people or upper middle class people invited to these events. This is why when I tell you not to be afraid of your neighbor, because this is what mainstream media wants you to do. They want you to be afraid of your neighbor. They want you to be afraid of someone that has a different political ideology than you, so that you don't focus on the class issue. Because if you're focusing on the class issue, then you're starting to see that you have people, and I mean, these are very powerful people. This is not someone who's making $1 million a year. You have very elite, powerful people going to events where they are trying to make decisions for the rest of the world. That includes you. And we're not offered a seat at the table. We're not allowed to enter the room. Why do rich people get to make decisions about what happens with us? Very scary times. Very scary times wherein more people need to talk about this. Until Davos attendees start talking about taxing the rich, the entire gathering will remain a very public example of how out of touch they really are. Now, that's coming from Disney, a signatory of the new letter to Davos attendees. So this is the key point here that Common Dreams is trying to make. They can have all these events that they want to, but until they address this issue, nothing is going to change. So it is just not sustainable the way the economy has been going for the past for my whole lifetime, actually. Now, what are some of the issues with the World Economic Forum? Let's get into this clip here.
After 2 years running the world from home, the political and business elite is back in the Swiss Alps this week. A spring World Economic Forum without the snow, but plenty to discuss. The war in Ukraine top of the agenda, with President Zelensky addressing the meeting by video link, and MPs and ministers from Kiev here in person.
One of the decision or key decisions that they were discussing at Davos was this war in Ukraine. I believe I played a clip from that on this show a couple of months ago, where there was actually one person who said, we are going to fight till the last Ukrainian. We are going to give them money as long as it takes. Again, handful of elite people, not only making economic decisions, but also making decisions in reference to warfare in the world. When I tell you that the president doesn't really run the country, believe me, the president doesn't really run the country. Let's go on.
Clear message. The West must do more to stand up to Moscow.
If you are paying two Russian companies for their oil, for their gas, you are giving them resources to continue destructing our towns, our villages, killing our children, raping our women, elderly, toddlers, babies, and destroying the country.
But there'll be no Russians. The oligarchs who used to throw the most opulent parties are banned. And there's very little British presence. Chancellor Rishi Sunak is staying away, and so's the business secretary, despite, or perhaps because, of the rare concentration of wealth and power that can make Davos look like a party to which only the super rich are invited.
He said, can make it look like, no, that's exactly what it is. So notice he said there were no Russians that were invited, very few British people that were invited, but that's exactly what it is. This is one long week of a party of rich people, elite, powerful people making decisions for everybody else. That should never be okay. And so Elon Musk has hired someone who's the chairman of the WEF. This is the person who is going to be running Twitter. So when people came to me and they said, oh, Elon Musk, he's so free speech, he's going to look out for everybody, everything's going to be great. Really? You don't think there aren't going to be issues with censorship when you have someone who's a part of the WEF managing Twitter? Think about that again.
I think we all know that we're in the middle of a very difficult global context. There are a lot of crises afoot. There is, of course, the geopolitical conflict. There is the ongoing effects of the pandemic. And all of this, every single day, is affecting people's lives. And that is exactly why we need to bring those that have the ability to support those that are suffering from this current moment together and start rebuilding towards a new era of cooperation.
The big global brands are here to show their wares in a rarefied environment that celebrates the virtues of liberal capitalism.
You want to try augmented reality?
With few dissenting voices.
So notice what he said there, celebrating liberal capitalism with few dissenting voices, because the voices that are present are people who benefit from the capitalist system. They benefit from the liberal capitalism. They're not affected by inflation right now. They weren't affected when the gas prices were high. They're not affected by high grocery store prices right now. They're not affected. They benefit from the very system that is destroying a lot of other people, that working class people are having to struggle with, that poor people are having to struggle with. And you have all these people with enormous amounts of wealth and all these people at the bottom who are struggling to get by. And they're making the decisions for the people who are struggling. How is that right? It's not right. I want to go back here, this little part right here again. Pay attention to what she says about the crisis and the capitalism.
Towards a new era of cooperation.
The big global brands are here to show their wares in a rarefied environment that celebrates the virtues of liberal capitalism.
You want to try augmented reality?
With few dissenting voices.
The World Economic Forum says it wants to improve the world through responsible capitalism. And with a war in Europe and an economic and potentially a food crisis, they've got plenty to work on. They might also consider here how things have gone so badly wrong.
A united stand against Russian aggression may be the truest measure of whether Davos's return makes a difference.
But the reason why they're asking, like, how did things go so terribly wrong? Because of capitalism, because the current system in place that they benefit from. You know, you cannot have capitalism without having some form of exploitation. It goes hand in hand. So although they may not be the people that are exploited, someone somewhere is. And most likely it's us. If you think you have wealth, you think because you make $200,000 a year, $100,000 a year, you think you have wealth? You have nothing. You have nothing compared to these people. These people control the world. They are powerful and they can make those key decisions. And when you talk about the political people who were there, Kirsten Sinema was there. What is she doing there? Because she is in the back pocket of hedge fund managers. See, the people who go along with it, she wanted to be a part of that club. They let her in because she looks out for them. And that's why she's one of the people who would vote against something like a $15 minimum wage. Because she's in the back pocket of these people. So that is who Elon Musk has decided to hand Twitter over to. That is the new CEO. And Pat Webb called it out. Twitter's new CEO, Linda Yaccarino, Yaccarino is currently the executive chair for the World Economic Forum and was chairman of advertising at NBC Universal. So you have two conflicts of interest. You have the economic conflict of interest, financial conflict of interest here, and you also have the media conflict of interest. That's a problem. So we will see how this goes with Miss Linda driving the ship. We shall see. What is that, Monarch? Linda is also a former Trump appointee. There you go. There you go. So keep your eye on Twitter and we'll see what happens. If you notice some weird changes, this could be the reason why. Now, speaking of economics, that leads us into our next story. And this is Richard Wolff and the banking crisis. Now, Richard Wolff interviewed Giannis. I haven't actually heard from him in a while in reference to interviews. But Giannis Varoufakis, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. You might recognize his face. But they're going to talk a little bit here about this banking crisis, where it actually is coming from, the current one that we have right now, and how this all leads into capitalism. These two stories are connected. We have to start paying attention, guys.
Hear your thinking about it. Let's start with what is very much shaking this side of the Atlantic, and maybe also your side, the so-called banking crisis that we are in. That was precipitated, even though it's been building for a while, it was precipitated by the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in California, the Signature Bank in New York, perhaps also Credit Suisse in Switzerland. And you have made a remark that I thought would be a good place to start. Your comment, at least as you are quoted, quote, "Let the banks burn." Tell us a little bit what you think is going on and what that quotation means.
Go ahead and hit that like button, guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so. Think about what he just said. Let the banks burn. Think about that.
Let me preface my comments with the strong conviction that this is not a new banking crisis. This is exactly the same banking crisis that we experienced in 2007, 2008. It never went away.
Boom. This is the point that I really want to stress. So when we were talking about the Silicon Valley Bank crisis and Signature Bank, and then I think we also talked about First Republic as well on the show, there were numerous financial experts that you saw on mainstream media say, this is nothing like 2008. We're not headed in that direction. No, you don't need to be worried. You don't need to be concerned. And I told you that I feel like this is still a part of the same issue. I didn't feel like this was necessarily a separate thing. That's why I kept saying I'm getting 2008 vibes, like that kind of thing. So Giannis here is letting you know this is coming from the same banking crisis that we had in 2008. It never really went away. And if it never really went away, this is all starting to make more sense. Because one of the things that I noticed is that even a couple of years later after the banking crisis, the economy started to pick up again. But to me, financially, it never felt the way it did before the 2008 housing crisis again. At least not for me. I don't know about you guys. And I think I'm right about that. So what we have here, we're talking 10 plus years down the road, and we are still having issues from that 2008 banking crisis. And that was the subprime mortgage rates. You guys know about that whole story. But when you have a situation where you have banks that were stealing people's homes, particularly elderly Black people's homes, these homes were foreclosed. Then you had companies like BlackRock buying those foreclosed properties, renovating those homes, and then selling them at a higher price. This is part of the reason why it is very difficult for younger people today to buy a single family home. Yes, there are other factors that go along with this. Student debt is a big part of it. But you have to understand, when people tell you we have a housing shortage, there was no housing shortage. We don't have a shortage of homes. What we have are homes that people can't afford to buy. And that goes back to BlackRock buying up those foreclosed properties. And that goes back to those banks stealing those homes from people, elderly people, particularly elderly Black people, who some of them had already almost paid off the homes. It all goes back to 08, in my opinion. So this is very important for people to understand. So when someone tells you, because people keep saying this, someone tells you there's a housing shortage, there is no housing shortage. What there is are homes that people just can't afford to buy, thanks to companies like BlackRock and thanks to those banks. Let's go on.
It's not that it was fixed and now it's coming back. The crisis of Wall Street, of the smaller banks, of the shadow banking system, both in the United States and across the European Union and in the United Kingdom, that crisis never went away. All that happened was that sometime at the beginning of 2009, once the Obama administration had been sworn in, and the G7 leaders and central bankers gathered in London under the aegis of a certain Mr. Gordon Brown, the then Labour Prime Minister, they decided essentially to print more than $30 trillion in order to refloat finance without fixing its structural problems, because these problems are impossible to fix without effectively undoing the whole model of globalization that was built since the early 1990s. So it's a bit like what they did in 2009 was a little like administering very large doses of cortisone into a cancer patient. The tumor doesn't go away. The patient seems perkier, seems to be doing better. Crisis has not gone away. Indeed,
I think his audio breaks up a little bit here. We have to scoot to another part anyway. But the point that he's trying to drive home there is that this crisis, it did not go away. And that explains why people have been struggling for so long. Now we're going to go to part 2, because they take a break and then they come back, where they talk about the issue with capitalism. So let's listen to this piece here.
Called Global Capitalism, designed to help others understand current economic events and trends so they can explain the impact and effects capitalism creates across the globe to others. Global Capitalism is available on our website, democracyatwork.info. There you can also learn more about everything we produce, sign up for our mailing list, follow us on social media, and support the work we do. Please stay with us. We will.
Sorry. Here we go.
Empire is declining, and with it, its capitalist center. So let me turn it over to you again, Giannis. What do you think?
Well, in one sense, the United States economic machine has been faltering and declining since the mid-60s, as you know, when the United States lost its trade surplus. And the result of that was, as we know, that Richard Nixon, on the 15th of August, 1971, blew up the Bretton systems, the Bretton Woods system that the United States had created. Why? Because America was no longer capable, due to it being a deficit country, to maintain the global dollar-based system that it had created after 1944. So in a sense, there's been a decline. Rick, back in 1970, when...
So yeah, I just want to point this out because a lot of people say, well, there was a recession in the 1970s and maybe that's actually why, when it really started. But Giannis is saying it actually goes back to the 1960s. Now, I wasn't alive then, and I know some of you watching were not either. But maybe we could speak to our parents or our grandparents about that.
Henry Kissinger was not even in the State Department. He had put a question to his entourage. And the question was very similar to yours. Now that we are declining as an economic power, how can we maintain our hegemony? And the answer that was given to him by a young man back then, youngish man, Paul Volcker, you remember him, right? When he was acting as an advisor to Henry Kissinger at the National Security Agency Council. So it's really very simple. We have to make sure that we maintain our hegemony by making other people pay for it, which is the model after the 1970s, which Paul Volcker also helped establish once he had moved to the Fed. Essentially, if you think about it, it's quite remarkable.
They maintained that hegemony by making other people pay for it. And who were the other people? Think about that. That decision was made in 1970s. And we've been dealing with it ever since.
American empire is the first empire in human history that has managed to make the wealthy of the rest of the world, of the conquered, if you want, voluntarily to send their wealth to Wall Street, and therefore to close the loop, the recycling loop, whereby the American trade deficit operates as a vacuum cleaner, sucking into the American markets the net exports of everybody else, Germany, France, Italy, and of course Japan, and primarily China. With 70% of the profits of the Japanese, the Italians, the French, the Japanese, and the Chinese going back into real estate, into the stock exchange, and into the insurance businesses of the United States. So, to cut a long answer short, the center of the American empire is shrinking in terms of GDP, of total income, in terms of total investment, in terms of the jobs that it can create, good quality jobs within the United States. All this is in decline. But the hegemony of the United States does not depend on that. There is a disconnect between the real economy of the United States and the power of the rentier class, the rentier American ruling class.
I want to comment on the real estate piece before he gets to the rentier class, because this is connected. The real estate piece. So when he talks about other countries, investing their money in real estate, investing their money in Wall Street. So we see this a lot on the East Coast. I can't speak for the West Coast, but on the East Coast, we do see where international investors will come in and they will purchase commercial real estate, right? Sometimes also residential as well. And they will purchase it. And I had a friend go through this. They will purchase these units, these buildings, and then they will choose to renovate the buildings, which means the people in the buildings that live there, they have to move. They have to leave, right? They'll renovate the buildings, and the people in the neighborhood are told, we are bringing more affordable housing to the neighborhood. Couple months down the road, they look across the street and they see it's a luxury condo building or a luxury apartment building. What happened to the affordable units that they were supposed to bring in? This happens often. It's happened in Boston a lot, Cambridge, Somerville, the whole area. It happens in New York. It happens in DC. Like, this is not something that's uncommon, particularly here. So now the people who can afford to rent those units, it's only people of a certain professional class that can afford to pay $3,000, $4,000 a month for an apartment. And this is how the neighborhoods will start to change. This is how gentrification will start to make its way through the neighborhoods, because now the property value of that building, where a one bedroom may have been $1,900 or $2,000 a month, which is pretty cheap for Boston, believe it or not. Now the property value increases because it's more expensive to rent in that building now. So when the property value of that building increases, then that puts pressure on the buildings that are next to it to also increase the property value. Then the next thing you know, you get another international investor who will come in to the landlord in the building next to that one and say, sell me the building. Don't worry, I'll keep it in the community. We'll keep it the same. It does not happen. And people, one by one, they're pushed out. So This is a big problem, but I want to add to what Giannis is saying. It's not just international investors in reference to real estate. It's also companies right here in the USA, like BlackRock and Vanguard, that buy up these buildings and renovate them and make them pretty much unaffordable to the working class people who grew up in those neighborhoods. This is why I continue to say, and I will continue to say this, there is no housing shortage. You just have housing that the average working class American, particularly here on the East Coast, can no longer afford. That's what you have. Now, he's going to get into this piece here about the rentier class. This piece is important.
What that power hinges on, since it doesn't hinge on industry, on actual income, is on the capacity to maintain the hegemony of the dollar and the dollar payment system so as to ensure that the surplus value produced in China, in Japan, in Germany, and so on, ends up in the United States, not with the American people, of course, right? You know this better than anyone else. Not with the working class in the Midwest, but with the very, very few amongst the American regime.
There you go.
All right. I want to turn next to your own activism. Something is going on in Europe having to do with the extraordinary movement of the French people into the streets against Macron, having to do even with the trade unions and the transport sector in Germany, having to do with the Greeks in response to the railway catastrophe and the role of the government. I want your opinion. Here in the United States, we're speaking of a rise of labor militancy on a scale we haven't seen for 70 years. Is something comparable going on in Europe?
I have good news and I have bad news. I'll start with the good news. The good news is that, yes, in France and in Greece, in other countries as well, but primarily in these two countries, there's a tradition of them to this. The French had a revolution, and then a few years later, the Greeks had their revolution, both connected to the American Revolution, but that's going a long way back. Both in France and in Greece, there is clearly a tidal switch. The tide of neoliberalism and the success of toxic radical centrism have been reversed by the people out there. In Greece, you are right, we had a massive accident killing 57 young people. And this railway accident, it wasn't an accident. It was almost predetermined as a result of the botched privatization of our railways. That has turned the tide, and now we have a majority of the people out there who are against privatizations, and they are clearly expressing a view in favor of renationalization. That is a big.
And the Railroad Workers Union here in the United States, really, that's another thing that they're pushing too, is to nationalize the railroad. So notice that he said there that in Greece and in France, we've been covering the protests in France for quite a while, actually, that the people had a shift. Instead of the focus more so being support the neoliberalism model, there was this shift to let's support the radical model. So now that's why you have millions of people out in the streets protesting in France. So now the majority of the people are wanting to embrace radicalism, or are embracing the more what's considered radical option over the neoliberal option. And I think that is especially key if you want to have a massive class movement in this country. As long as people, the majority, still embrace the neoliberal model, we're never going to get anywhere in reference to making these demands, which means you would need at least 5% of the American population. That's all I'm asking for, to embrace that radical model to get substantial change. 5%. You don't need 80%. You don't need 90%. You just need 5% of the people in this country to want to flip and embrace that radical model. Now, what does that mean? That means that those 5% of Americans at some point will have to lose hope and faith in the electoral process. This is why I talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit. This is why I talk about how people have been given their money, given their last to these candidates and got nothing in return. This is why I continue to talk about it. Because until you get to the point where you say that is it, I do not trust the electoral process in this country, it is going to be very difficult to get some type of radical class movement in this country. Because at the end of the day, you cannot have both. And I want to be very clear when I say this. You cannot have both. Let me explain to you why. One of the reasons why the civil rights movement was so successful is because they did not have both. The people focused on the activism for the civil rights movement were not trying to run for office. The people focused on the activism for the civil rights movement were not outside saying, donate money to such and such candidate. They were focused particularly on the movement and the cause. Here is what happens when you try to do both. 9 times out of 10, the neoliberal side, what he's referring to, wins out over the radical side because that's easier to do. It's easier just to donate money. It's easier just to go to the booth and vote. It's much more difficult to do the radical process. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. That's why I tell you, you can't do both at once. So what does that mean? That means that if we got 5% of the American people to embrace the more radical side of we are going to protest such and such day after day after day after day until we get these demands met, like the people in France, that is one way to go about having a significant class movement in this country. They're not going to just give it to you. They're not just going to give you a $15 minimum wage just because they think you've been suffering long enough. If that was the case, you would have had it years ago. They're not just going to give you health care just because they're like, oh, all these people are sick and dying. Maybe we should give everybody health care now. That's not how it works. You have to demand it. And that's what people in France understand. And that's what a lot of Americans do not understand. A lot of Americans think they can just get this shit done by going to the booth and voting for someone. If that were the case, so many working class people and poor people in this country would not be without. It is not the case. And that is why you don't have the things that you should have. Necessary benefits just for as being a citizen in this fucking country. That's why. You tell yourself that you deserve it. They don't think that you do. Let's go back in.
Similarly, in France, Macron's reign has been punctured. Now he's a lame duck. He will continue as a lame duck because the demonstrators, the very brave demonstrators, seized the opportunity of railing against Macron's pension reforms. By the way, the conventional media, the systemic media, present that reform as being moderate. And it sounds moderate because what did Macron do? He pushed the age limit when you go from a wage to a pension from 62 to 64. It sounds pretty moderate. Well, it is not. Once you take into consideration the fact that the average poor Frenchman lives 10 years less than the average French male rich person.
10 years less. And you can have these statistics in the US too. I told you in Boston, if you're in Roxbury and you cross the street to the South End, there's a part in Boston where Roxbury and the South End intersect. It's like Mass Ave. And if you're in the South End and you walk across the street to Roxbury at that intersection, your life expectancy drops by 30 years. That's insane. But it happens. This is what happens when you don't have the resources.
So that means that by elevating you deny a very substantial proportion of working class men the opportunity to get any pension at all. So this is the good news. The good news is that our peoples here in Europe, especially in Greece and France, but in other countries too, have turned the tide, which was essentially submerging all opposition to the neoliberal, toxic, pro-oligarchic policies across Europe. Now, the bad news. The bad news is that we are nowhere near having returned to the height of 2014, 2015, when we had hundreds of thousands of millions of people in Spanish cities occupying the piazzas. Remember the Indignados? We had millions here in Greece over a period of 3 months. We had the Blockupy movement in Germany. Back then, the structural crisis of European capitalism was so deep. The euro itself, our currency, our single currency, was very close to capitulating, to falling victim of its own hubris. And what happened was that we elected the government here in Greece, which carried the hopes of every progressive European on its back. Our government surrendered on that fateful evening of the 5th of July 2015. Since then, Rick, our movements are just a shadow of themselves. They are picking up again, but we must not exaggerate yet the extent to which they are capable of putting an effective brake, a final brake on this runaway train of neoliberal inhumanity.
So what Giannis is saying there is that even though you see those protests in France and the people rising up in Greece, he said compared to 2014 to 2015, this is the bad news that he gave, it's still nowhere near what they had then, which means at some point, people have started to break. And that can happen, right? People just get tired. Sometimes people get tired of protesting. I'm just being honest. And that seems to have happened. And also, on top of that, you still have the effects of this war in Ukraine and the inflation and people in Europe dealing with that to go along with it. So it's almost like a double whammy. So there's good news there and there's bad news there. But despite all that, they're still able to get millions of people out in the streets. And I think we need to pay very close attention to what's happening with the banking crisis, because I think this is going to be very telling. We need to pay attention to the banking crisis, and we need to pay attention to what's happening with BRICS, moving away from the US dollar. This summer is going to be hot. Okay. This summer is going to be a hot summer, because I believe that's when they're supposed to have that conference to make that happen. So we'll just have to continue to follow that. We go to some of the comments here. Springflower says JP Morgan is buying up these banks as the CEO tells the government they should take our land for these 15-minute cities. Modern day concentration camps and solar built off the backs of enslaved children. I hear you. Esquerdista says Varoufakis. I always want to say Varoufakis for some reason. Varoufakis got beaten up recently by some thug outside a restaurant in Athens. Oh, wow. I didn't know about that. And thank you for the super chat, Mary. You have to get mad to make stuff happen. That's right. That's right, man. All right, we're going into our final story. And this is about Lula. So Lula has decided to give his opinion about Julian Assange and how he feels the U.S. government is handling this. This is an important story because this leads into an upcoming event with President Biden in Australia. So for those who are not aware, President Biden is scheduled to go to Australia. And there's some news that I want to share about that in reference to Caroline Kennedy as well. But let's first get into this speech here from Lula. You'll have to read the subtitles here, guys. So here we go.
Que Deus te abençoe por essa pergunta, porque eu acho uma vergonha. Eu vou falar, inclusive, na frente do jornalista, porque isso vale para vocês e vale para mim. É uma vergonha que um jornalista que denunciou as falcatruas de um Estado contra os outros esteja preso, sabe, condenado a morrer na cadeia e a gente não fazer nada para libertá-lo. É um negócio maluco. A gente que briga e fala em liberdade de expressão, direito de gritar, direito de... Ou seja, o cara está preso porque denunciou as falcatruas. E a imprensa não se mexe na defesa desse jornalista. Eu, sinceramente, não consigo entender. Não consigo entender. Eu até peço perdão, porque eu vou, quando chegar no Brasil, vou ligar para o primeiro-ministro, porque foi um assunto que eu esqueci de falar com ele. Eu já mandei carta para o Assange, já publiquei carta, já escrevi artigo sobre o Assange, mas eu acho que é preciso um movimento da imprensa mundial na defesa dele. Não é na defesa dele enquanto pessoa, é na defesa da liberdade de denunciar. O cara não denunciou nada vulgar. O cara denunciou que um Estado estava vigiando os outros. E isso virou crime contra o jornalista. E a imprensa que defende liberdade de imprensa não faz um movimento para libertar esse cidadão. É triste. É triste. Mas é verdade. É verdade. A gente precisa colocar nossas teorias na prática de vez em quando, para que a gente possa poder continuar falando em liberdade de expressão.
Okay. So it says here, Brazilian President Lula criticized the UK government for the imprisonment of Julian Assange and called it shameful. Lula, who was in London for the coronation of King Charles III, condemned the treatment of Assange and called for global action to free him. And this would be interesting to see if these countries that are part of BRICS will actually come together and decide to be the one to start that movement, because it's just not happening. Obviously, with the Biden administration, there are people in Congress who have, spoken out against the imprisonment of Julian Assange, but there are very few names on that letter that was started by Rashida Tlaib, and there should be more names on that letter. It should be bipartisan, actually, to be honest. But unfortunately, the voices are not loud enough coming from this end. Now, this piece right here, what he said, I just want to highlight one part here. Let me just put this here. Right here. This part.
Uma vergonha. Eu vou falar, inclusive, na frente do jornalista, porque isso vai...
He said, I'm going to talk in front of journalists, but he goes, because that goes for you and it's
vale
valid
para vocês e vale para mim. É uma vergonha.
It is shameful that a journalist
que jornalista que denunciou
who denounced the misdeeds
as falcatruas de Estado contra os outros
of a state against the others is imprisoned.
Esteja preso, sabe, condenado a morrer na cadeia,
condemned to die in jail,
e a gente não fazer nada para libertá-lo.
That part right there. And we do nothing to set him free. That's the piece that I really want people to hold on to. I want you to hold on to that piece because it is absolutely ridiculous. Now, there may be some type of hope. Now, this is coming from Caroline Kennedy. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Caroline Kennedy, she is an ambassador, and she is actually trying to push this effort in Australia because Joe Biden has a planned visit coming soon. So listen to this. Caroline Kennedy meets Assange supporters, fueling breakthrough hopes. So hopefully this is the way. A cross-party delegation of Australian politicians has met with U.S. Ambassador Caroline Kennedy to increase the pressure on the Biden administration to drop its pursuit of Julian Assange and to warn him of what's ongoing. I'm trying to blur out some words, sorry. And to warn the founder's ongoing incarceration risk undermining the U.S.-Australia alliance. Assange supporters feel heartened by Kennedy's decision to hold the meeting and are cautiously optimistic that momentum is building for a breakthrough on Assange's case as he continues to languish in London's high security Belmarsh prison. So there's a picture of Caroline Kennedy there. Not sure if everyone is familiar with her. The highly sought after meeting comes at a pivotal moment, just a fortnight before Prime Minister Anthony Albanese hosts Joe Biden for his first presidential visit to Australia, and days after opposition leader Peter Dutton significantly shifted his rhetoric on Assange's case. So this is important. This is coming up. And it says that Kennedy hosted members of the Parliamentary Friends of Julian Assange group, Labour MPs Julian Hill and Josh Wilson, Liberal MP Bridget Archer, Independent MP Andrew Wilkie, and Green Senator David Shoebridge for a working breakfast on Tuesday at the U.S. Embassy in Canberra to hear their views on this issue. The delegation members stressed that while they had differing views on an array of political topics, they all agreed the case against Assange had dragged on for too long and he should be allowed to return to Australia. So there is that push coming from Caroline Kennedy. Now, Joe Biden does have a meeting that is scheduled, I think it's later at the end of this month. But I did see this video from Sky News that says now they're not really sure if he's going to actually go because of the issue with the debt ceiling that has not been, solved in Congress, because they're still fighting over the budget about the debt ceiling. So listen to this. But if they get that resolved, he should still be able to make it. Listen to this.
US President Joe Biden could be forced to cancel his upcoming trip to Australia if he is unable to strike a deal in negotiations on raising the debt ceiling. The president is due to leave Washington on May 17 for a G7 leaders meeting in Japan before flying to Sydney to meet Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at the Quad Leaders Summit. Mr. Biden says he is optimistic an agreement can be reached, but insists he will stay in the US capital if a solution is not found.
Somehow we got down to the wire and we still hadn't resolved this, and the due date was in the matter of when I was supposed to be away. I would not go. I would stay till this gets finished.
The US could default as soon as June if Congress cannot agree to increase its borrowing limit.
Okay, and we can stop it there because that part's not really relevant to the story. But the thing is, if Joe Biden is able to make it there, I do believe there will be Assange supporters, obviously protesting peacefully in some way, shape, or form, calling for his administration to act and go ahead and put in that request to free Julian Assange so that he is not extradited back to the United States and they send him back home to Australia so he can be with his family. And if you are in that area, for those of you listening and you're Assange supporters, definitely stay tuned for that. I'll give you guys an update. If he does not go, then it's most likely that Kamala Harris will probably have to go. Either way, the protest, I think, should still happen, whether it's him or if it's her. But the fact that you have Caroline Kennedy, who's a U.S. ambassador, she's on board for this. She's got other people, other MPs on board for this. This has gone on for too long. He does need to be freed. It's just a reality situation. This shit's gone on for too damn long. I'm just keeping it real. Let me go to some of the comments here. Randy, Sabby, been listening to your show while I do chores and take care of sick kids, but I had to get on the chat and say, this is great. # free Assange now. Yeah. And like Caroline Kennedy, whatever you think of her, it is what it is, but at least she's right on this issue. Okay. She's right on this issue. I'm going to get to the comments on Rockfin, and then we're going to head over to call in. I'm not going to take a break in between. We're just going to jump right on over there because that is what is going to happen, because Eric's not with me. So you guys probably noticed that. He's watching the game. Let's see, which I totally understand. That's why I was like, look, definitely feel free to watch the game. Okay, Rockfin. Let me do my pop out. Woohoo! Great. Okay, let me go ahead and share the tips on Rockfin, and then I don't know who's winning, Danny. I've been trying not to check. I felt like maybe, it's best for me not to see the end of this game after all. I'm kind of superstitious when it comes to sports, believe it or not. Okay, let's make this bigger. Thank you. Uh-oh, I made it too big. Sorry. All right, there we go. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Anna. Okay, it's official. I love Elizabeth Beck. I mean, I love both Becks, but first time seeing her, she's fire. Yeah, she's pretty cool, huh? Awesome. I don't know why I didn't let you shorten this on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip, DC. Thank you for having the Becks on to discuss the DNC fraud lawsuit. The Becks, Nico House, and the Convo Couch have done more to advance democratic values, or at least attempt to, than virtually anyone else currently living. Specie. Okay. Thank you for the tip, Dave. Sabby Sabs, $2. Thank you. And thank you for this tip, DC. Special honorable mention to the late Senator Mike Gravel, who published a book in his final years on bringing about a direct democratic system in which the entire citizenry can both legislate and vote in national referendums. Us plebeians of the modern age have less democratic power than the plebs of the late Roman Republic. P.S. Could your moderating team please unban me from the YouTube chat? I don't have a moderator today. It's just me. So I'm trying to work both sides. But I'll look into that. And thank you for the tip, Roger. Interesting story. Interesting couple. I thought we were about to have an Ike and Tina moment live. Are we going to have to call someone? However, I thought the lady who kept jumping into the camera was on point about her petrodollar. Would have to know, I don't know what that means, would have to no longer be the world's currency would have to happen. Corporate hierarchical model can't compete with cooperative collapse model China is forming with nations. And thank you for this tip as well. Thank God we defeated Governor Hochul's plan to build more quote unquote affordable housing by Long Island Railroad that would give developers home rule to override local zoning laws to build more. Let's lose hope in representative democracy and discover direct democracy. Fill in the CBI circles, leave candidates blank unless Indy and third. Yeah, that's a big one. Like for me, like I'm just like, dude, just leave the candidates, leave it blank. Like that's what I did for the midterms. I didn't vote for Democrats or Republicans. I voted for the Green Party peoples and any third party or independent person. And if there wasn't one, I just left it blank. Is what it is. We are moving on over to call in, and I'm actually right on time. Yes. This is episode 105, DNC fraud lawsuit recap. Let me know what you think. Now that you've heard from the lawyers of the DNC fraud lawsuit, what are your thoughts? We are going to go ahead and head over there. Let me go ahead and pin this link to the top of the chat, and we can scoot on over to call in. So I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. I gotta log in, I guess. Let me see. Tonight's the night. Let's live it up. Let's live it up. I got my money. What's up? What's up? I don't know. Go out and smash it. Like, oh my God. Jump in that sofa. And then we'll do it again. Sorry, I'm just singing until I can put the link up there. Tonight's the night. Let's live it up. Let's live it up. Oh, here we go. All right, let me sign in. I actually had do you guys remember that song from Eminem, Two Trailer Park? What's it, the one? Two trailer park girls go around the outside. Two trailer park girls go around the outside. Round the outside. All right. I had to do this stupid two-step verification for to sign into the YouTube. Okay. Okay. This thing is so slow. Sorry, guys. Okay. Now let's try this again. I'm going to put this link in the chat. Let me see if let me get it. Tonight's the night. Let's live it up. Two trailer park girls go around the outside. Round the outside. Round the outside. Guess who's back? Shady's back. Tell a friend. Round the outside. God, this is taking forever. All right, finally. Geez, YouTube. Let me get the link. Copy. All right, there we go. And now I can just pin it. Oh, there we go. And pin. Yay, it's there. All right, guys. That message is, the link is pinned to the top of the live chat. You should be able to see it now. So let's go ahead and head on over to call in. All right. Have a good Mother's Day and the rest of your Sunday, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.